Welcome to the War in Heaven. I am Austin Hepworth. I'm here along with Michael Hepworth, and today we are going to talk about the weather or some of the weather news, and also maybe some of the things that we see, that principles we see associated with the War in Heaven. Um, this is meant to be a little bit fun in the sense of talking about some topics. We're not trying to seriously compare these topics, but look at them in a kind of a good humored way as we go through and see some of the things that, some of the principles that are there playing out in the news. And weather gives us a good example of these, but you will find these in many of the news stories. So Michael lives in Indiana. Indiana recently had a big snowstorm come through. And it was interesting to see some of the ways that the news was talking about this snowstorm. Michael, what were some of the headlines that came up for you guys in Indiana?
Yeah, lots of these were leading up to the storm, and then a few during the storm. There was a lot of foreshadowing, like this is what's going to happen. I think people were trying to, or news outlets were trying to let people know what to expect, maybe. But some of it, uh, I think, to me, kind of went overboard a little bit. So we saw headlines like from the USA Today. We saw heaviest snowfall in over a decade. Mega winter storm bears down on millions. And just looking at the verbiage in that headline, um, mega winter storm bears down on millions. And I just thought, wow, yeah. I mean, there's a winter storm going across multiple states. You probably could have said tens of millions, but just stuck with millions. Then there was from a local news here in Indiana. They said deep freeze to follow largest snowstorm central Indiana has seen in years. A deep freeze. CNN said 62 million people under threat of major winter storm set to deliver season's most significant blow yet. They're under threat of a significant blow. NPR said while the storm was going on, kind of towards the end, they reported at least 4 people are dead as massive snowstorm creates dangerous travel conditions. The AP reported that the heaviest snowfall in a decade possible in some areas as a winter storm threatens the U.S. So a lot of kind of sensational verbiage there. There's threats, there's danger, massive, major, significant, mega winter storm. Um, Kind of making it seem like this is just going to be awful, apocalyptic. That's the way it felt. People were rushing stores. This seems to happen before any snowstorm where they say that we're going to get significant winter weather. They rush the stores. They buy up all the milk and the eggs and the bread. You go to the stores right before the storm hits and the shelves are all empty. But I was looking at some of these and I was like, I want to investigate these a little bit. Uh, for example, the one from NPR, at least 4 people are dead as massive snowstorm creates dangerous travel conditions. So I looked, this storm went across many states, and they were reporting 4 people dead due to the storm. In Indiana every day, based on the number of traffic accidents, at least 2 people die each day on the road in Indiana, regardless of weather conditions. So 4 people dead across multiple states, put in context, is perhaps significantly lower than what is typically seen, if that's all that there was. Um, all the claims of heaviest snowfall in a decade possible or largest snowstorm central Indiana has seen in years, heaviest snowfall in over a decade. All these claims are kind of funny. In 2022, we saw a storm little lighter on snow, a lot worse on temperature. The temperature didn't really fall much during this storm as they thought it would. But in 2022, we were hanging out in the single digits for over a week, seeing negative temperatures quite often. In 2021, Indiana saw 8 inches to a foot of snow in many different places. It's just 3-4 years ago. But we got to be sensational and talk about heavy snowfall in over a decade possible. Depending on how you define it, you can make things seem worse. If you're looking at one place that didn't get a lot of snow, and then this time around they got more snow, you can say, well, this one place saw a record amount of snow, even though maybe its neighbor didn't. It's just interesting to look at. This isn't to say that, throw away all weather reporting as junk science. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm looking at the way they kind of sensationalized what was going on. If you're living in Indiana and it's winter, you'll see some snow. You won't see a lot of snow. I used to live in Utah. And Utah gets, at least northern Utah, gets significantly more snow than central Indiana does. So for me, it doesn't seem like a terrible thing to get the kind of snow we've been getting. And so the way these headlines come out, they make it seem like this is astonishing that we would get snow, that we would end up with maybe 8 inches of snow, and it's not. And it seems to happen every couple of years. We'll get a storm of 8 inches. We always get some kind of snow in central Indiana, and so we'll probably talk more about this, but we start to wonder, why is it so sensational? Why do we make this seem like it's the worst thing? I did a comparison to the Weather Channel's report on the storm, January 5th and 6th in 2025. So after the storm went through, I was like, what do the headlines then say from the Weather Channel? And they said, heavy snow of January 5th and 6th, 2025. That was the headline. After it had come through, not much of a big deal. Before it came through, big deal, big problems. It's a mega storm. It's threatening the U.S. People are going to be in trouble. After, not so much of a big deal. So kind of looking at the way these were written, you start to wonder, why is this so sensational? What are we driving at? Why does this drive people's interest? Because you know that people are clicking on these things, reading through them. Nobody's reading the report from the Weather Channel after the fact that says heavy snow of January 5th and 6th. It's already gone. We've moved on to the next problem.
Yeah, and this is, I think, to your point, we start to look at why, and there's obviously a number of factors. I don't think there's just one thing. So, for example, sensational news sells more. We as humans are far more inclined to click on a headline that says, mega winter storm bears down on millions, as opposed to, hey, it's going to snow. And so the news certainly has an interest in creating sensationalized headlines. But I think a little bit deeper, there's a couple other things that could be playing out with the sensationalized side of things, with the news, with different things that are happening. And I think it's wise to be aware of. If we go back to one of the basic premises of the war in heaven, it was that Satan was offering a certainty. He was saying, I will make things certain for you. And you even find this if you go to Genesis chapter 3. He's there, and he's talking to the woman, it says. And so, yeah, looking at Genesis chapter 3, he tells the woman, he says, hey, eat some of the fruit of this tree of good and evil, or knowledge of good and evil. And the woman says back to him, God has said, you shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And the serpent said unto the woman, you shall not surely die. And so ultimately Eve partakes of this fruit, and so this was something that was interesting to me, that Satan is offering, again, is from what we know, he offered premortally, he said, let me make sure that everyone's saved. And then he says again to Eve, you're not going to die. I'll take care of you. And, whether or not he had a plan, I don't know. But one thing that happened after this is that it says in verse 24 of chapter 3 that God placed cherubims and a flaming sword, which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. And it says in verse 22, lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. So there was this thing where maybe Satan did have a plan. Maybe he had a way to make sure that people lived, and he was planning on a eating of the fruit of the tree of life. I don't know. But the point more is that He said, "Ye shall not surely die." Satan's offering certainty to things. He's offering to say, I can solve this problem for you. This problem of life, this problem of agency, all these different things, there's risks involved with it. Let me help mitigate that. And when I see a lot of the news articles and a lot of where our things are headed politically, I see a lot of push where people are turning to the government to say, make our life certain. Make sure that nothing bad happens to us. We see this in things like crib recalls, where I'll see a crib, they'll recall millions of cribs because 2 infants died. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't, pay attention to these things and look at these things, but the way that our society works is if one person gets hurt, we're now looking at whether there has to be a change made. And we have such an enormous pressure on us to make people safe and to do this, this full evaluation, the responsibility for safety, the responsibility to say, oh, you can be injured by that. Let's take away that opportunity, that opportunity, that opportunity. And we saw this during COVID when the government said, oh, we've got to make you safe. So we're just going to lock you in your houses, essentially. Don't go out. Don't be with people. And then later, the US Surgeon General coming out and saying, wow, loneliness is a very deadly thing. When people are alone, it has significant health issues and impacts. And so we have this constantly, I'd say, this constant battle back and forth of the government trying to make us safe, and in the meantime, then hurting us more. And it's interesting to watch. It's really sad right now with the wildfires going on in California and LA that have burned so many homes there. We have a situation where it's quite fascinating to look at. The insurers chose prior to these wildfires to pull out. They stopped offering insurance to these homes and started canceling policies when they came up for renewal. Yeah, this is going to kill some of the independent insurance agents that have been selling this for 20, 30 years, different things. They said, but the risks have just become too great. They independently looked at the area and determined it wasn't safe based on what was taking place. And so there's a number of articles online that are then placing the blame on the government, saying, look, the government didn't act to make us safe. It's the government's failure because these insurers could see the writing on the wall. And all of this is to say, I'm not here saying it was the government, it wasn't the government. I actually, from just a realistic perspective, I don't personally believe the government can do everything to keep us safe. I believe, we have a lot of responsibility for our own life. And, I look at, for example, here in Utah, we have, there's a push for people to build homes closer and closer to mountains and higher up mountains. And there's some mountains or big hills that they're building up against and going up higher and higher. But on this here in Utah, it's a desert, and these hills or mountains in the summer will just be covered with brown, dry brush and weeds and whatever. And I look at those, and you just see this line of homes along them. And I think if that mountain ever catches on fire, it's going to sweep through all those homes. You can see it. And some people say, well, it's the government's job to make sure that doesn't happen. But I went to one other place here in Utah, and I was looking at property there, and it was a rural area, and I was concerned about it because it was property closest to the mountain where if there was a wildfire, it would come down there. And it was interesting, though, in the city, they openly had signs, and it said, create your own fire barriers, put up areas where you clear out all vegetation to make fire breaks, to do different things, because fires do come through and people take personal responsibility for that and do it themselves. And again, I'm not putting fault on government or individuals in California. I haven't been there. I haven't looked at all the situation and scenarios. But it's more to say that we have this big blame game we're playing where we're putting all the fault on the government. But in the same vein, we're saying to the government, we want you to save us. And our laws are becoming more and more that way. And even these news articles, when the news comes out with the sensationalized stories about snow and all these things. Michael, you're there in Indiana and your kid's basketball gets canceled preemptively. We don't even know how bad the snow is yet. They just cancel it. But part of the reason is because they're afraid of being blamed for someone's accident or unsafe condition. And so everyone's just opting to say, well, the news said it's a big deal, so we got to cancel because we don't want to be liable for it. And this notion of throwing around liability stems from the same, I believe it stems from the same principle of we're looking to someone else to ensure our safety. We're looking to someone else to make sure that our life is sure and certain. But as we do that, we're ultimately, I believe, robbing us of life more so. We're creating these draconian rules where everyone is now operating by fear. And we make decisions out of fear of, oh, I just got to cancel it because if someone's in an accident, we'll get sued. And government officials start making decisions out of fear. And everyone starts making out of fear because we're shifting this responsibility, saying, oh, it's your job to keep me safe. And we even see that in parenting, where parents are getting in more and more trouble if their child gets injured. And then we have this massive increase in helicopter parenting where parents refuse to let kids out of their sight. And it's having an emotional and mental toll on the parents. It's having an emotional and mental toll on the kids because we don't want to let them get hurt. And I believe that until we stop and recognize that the life that God gave us wasn't free of pain, it wasn't the safest condition. And there's a reason for that. We then have to choose to develop faith in something besides being safe all the time. But if what we desire is to be safe all the time, we're ultimately starting to reject one of the foundational things about life, that there is this uncertainty to it. And life requires that we embrace some level of uncertainty, and we'll never be able to eradicate it. And if we turn to the government as our savior and put more and more faith there, it's actually going to create more and more fear among all of us because no government has the power to keep us all safe. No government has the power to stop all fires from raging or earthquakes from happening or hurricanes from forming. And even as we're talking about weather, one of the huge pushes is the government's has this big thing about fighting climate change. And we're trying to use law to change Earth's climate. And I think it's the most fascinating, it's a huge, I guess, faith-based proposition that we can create laws that will change the course of the Earth's climate. But as I look at that, I think, should we put our time and resources into trying to stop climate? Because as I read about climate, there's some fascinating quotes. One from a guy that said, the fact that climate's changing is a given. It says it's always changing. Something's always happening with it. They said it would be a scientific oddity and kind of, abnormality if climate stayed the same, because it's never done that. And again, some people will say, oh, it's totally human caused. We can change it. But I look at things, and even with that, I saw one documentary on the Arctic, and it was showing how these huge holes were opening up in these areas that had big permafrost and different things. And at first they thought they were sinkholes and they were trying to figure out what it was, but as they inspected them, you could see that there'd been explosions coming out of these. And they started trying to figure out what was going on. And ultimately they determined through some of the testing that methane gases are escaping the Arctic. These have been frozen under permafrost for a long time, just stuck there. And they found some chimneys out where the ground's no longer frozen. And they're escaping, and then they can collect and gather sometimes and then explode and send out big, make huge holes type thing. But as I was looking at it, they were showing how for some reason there was a chimney they'd gone through with some advanced sonar equipment, and there was a chimney or a opening, kind of a small opening, that had somehow melted through the permafrost. We're talking over a mile down. There's still a ton of permafrost all around it, but some little chink opens up in the permafrost and these gases start escaping through it. And they had a lake in Alaska that was just bubbling from all the gases coming out. But as I looked at that, I thought, well, we have this debate. Is it human caused? Is it not? But I don't know of anyone that's alleging that our warming on top of the surface melted something a mile down in kind of a thin tunnel to get to these gases. There's something else happening. And as we look at things like climate, we look at things like prophecies and predictions of the future, whether you're religious, whether you're atheist, any of those things, there's people always prophesying. It's one of the things about the news and weather. We're prophesying, we're looking to the future for something. And a lot of our prophecies and a lot of things we look at and believe, I think we have to take a step back and say, what is the proper response? Can we make life sure? Can we make it so that nothing bad ever happens? Or should we be focused a little bit more on how do we live in a world where fires rage or where snow comes, and what do we do about it? And to me, it's a difference. There's this faith versus fear element. Fear of, if we have fear of pain, if we have fear of suffering, we almost take on a fear of life itself, and that creates a fear of other people. And then we turn to the government, we say we want more laws, save us, protect us, do all these different things. And again, there's a proper place for law to have some level of protection and things. But I'm talking about when we go too far and push to remove it from our lives. But Michael, curious to know your thoughts on some of those things.
Yeah, as you were talking through it, I thought of something that Mike Rowe had said. First one's kind of humorous. He said, whenever somebody starts telling you that your safety is their responsibility, they're either selling you something, running for office, or just yanking your chain. Basically saying either it's politicians or somebody trying to sell you something is going to try to take responsibility for your safety. And I think there's an interesting point here that your safety should ultimately be your responsibility. You shouldn't just assign that over to somebody else or some government organization or somebody. And there's an important side to that. I think we all agree that getting to the point where you're absolutely safe from all outcomes, we sometimes envision as being in a bubble, being wrapped up in bubble wrap. And we immediately see that our freedom to move and interact and do is incredibly constrained. And we also know that when it comes to things like our immune systems, if we just wall ourselves off from anything with any kind of bacteria in it, dirty in any kind of way, our immune system gets weakened incredibly. And it just takes one little virus to get through, and then it could kill us at that point if we have a weakened immune system. Our immune system stays strong through being challenged, generally speaking. And Mike Rowe also said this kind of on that same line. He said, the goal of living is not to merely stay alive. Cars are a lot safer in the driveway. Ships are a lot safer when they don't leave harbor. And people are a lot safer during a pandemic when they sit quietly in their basements waiting for the all clear. But that's not why cars, ships, and people are on the planet. And I think sometimes these conversations around how do we stay safe, how do we stop bad things from happening, kind of get to the point of forgetting what they're removing purpose from our lives, as all we seek to do is to stay alive. Then we forget about, and this going back to the war in heaven, why did we choose to come here? This, from what we believe with the war in heaven, we knew coming into this that there was going to be challenges and troubles, and we knew ultimately that the result of coming to this earth was death, and that led to a further promise of a new life living with Heavenly Father if we lived the right way. And so we knew there were challenges coming into this, and so to come here and then say, please remove all challenges, make me safe as possible, be that the government or somebody else, is forgetting the reason that we came here, the reason to that helps us learn and grow. There was one more, John Stuart Mill, I believe it was, who said this. Let me find this real quick. He said, A man who has nothing which he is willing to fight for, nothing which he cares more about than he does about his personal safety, is a miserable creature who has no chance of being free, unless made and kept so by the exertions of better men than himself. And I think we continue to move closer to that, where we care most about our personal safety. We just want to be as safe as possible. And the only reason we have freedom is because other people are exerting themselves to maintain freedom. And it really needs to be a personal responsibility of our own to fight for things that we think are important, not just for staying alive, for being safe, for having a certain outcome. We talked about creation, I think, in previous podcasts, and faith, and why faith is important to creation. And we're not building, creating, becoming where the outcomes are certain. You don't grow that way. You grow when the outcomes are uncertain, and you work and you fight and you strive to build or to become something that you're trying to become. And so that searching for the certain outcome and searching for a group to make that happen is anti that becoming. It's becoming stagnant. It's being wrapped up in a bubble. It's restricting freedom. And there's a balance there. There's a balance between absolute safety and no freedom, and no safety and total anarchy. And so I think we need to strive to talk about what that balance is, instead of to just say, how can I be safe? How can we make things safer, safer, safer? Because that's just going to restrict our becoming if that is our only goal.
Yeah, and I think it's an important point that as we talk, we're not here saying that there should be no law. But there is this balance. The law can accomplish some things, for sure, but it can't accomplish everything. And if we ask it to accomplish everything, this is where it leads to the fear and the control and all that type of things that come in that restrict our agency. And we have to look at what can feasibly done or not be done. But to your point about when you said cars, ships, and humans aren't on the planet to sit in the driveway or sit in the dock or sit at home. It reminded me of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader by C.S. Lewis. And in that book, the Dawn Treader is set sail from Narnia. It has a mouse on board named Reepicheep. And they reach, at some point in this book, they reach a mist of darkness, you could say. They can see that the ship can choose to sail into this darkness, or it can choose to go around it and avoid the darkness. And everyone on board says, whoa, we should definitely avoid the darkness. Don't want to sail into that. And Reepicheep the mouse says, why? He says, we came on this voyage specifically to explore and see things. He says, we didn't come to be safe. And he said, we have this duty to move on and be brave, essentially. And in the story, they end up going into the darkness because of Reepicheep, and they find and rescue a man that was stuck in the darkness. But the interesting thing to me about that was to really reflect on that, to say, but why? He says, why do we want to avoid the darkness and all the problems and all the potential issues? He said, because we came on this voyage specifically to explore and to find out more about the world. And I reflect on that quite a bit in life, of, should we take away all trampolines so that no kid ever breaks their leg? Should we stop driving so that no one dies in a car accident? There's balance, obviously, to life. I'm not saying that it's, just go buy the junkiest tramp you can, the dangerous and full of, rusty, pokey things that can injure you significantly. But again, it's to say, but at the end of the day, is there an experience to life? Is it part of our journey here? And this gets wrapped up, I think a big part of it, the faith we have to have if we are to be a liberty-minded people, or a liberty-loving people. We have to have a belief in a divine being that can make these things right at some point. And I believe that it's one reason why liberty is so closely tied to morality and so closely tied to religion, is that if you don't have the faith to say that things will be made right in the end, people become more desperate and more searching for there to be a solution on this planet alone for all problems and all ills. We want to stop all of them. But again, our solution is to turn to the government. And if we go too far with that and things go out of balance, it starts to have significant impacts on us. And we see these impacts, and then we see things, I believe, like the news, that start to sensationalize things, that start to talk about things. And we as humans then buy into that. One reason why we buy into it more and more and more on the sensationalized side is because it's stoking a fear inside of us, and it's causing us to look somewhere else. It becomes a means for people to start to gain power. And you can start to say, how do they want to gain power over me? And you can start to look to where the news continuously sensationalizes things, where the headings come from and things. And there's a real interesting quote, came from 1989, talking about the climate side of things. And this climate scientist was talking about kind of the conundrum they find themselves in. He said, on the one hand, as scientists, we are ethically bound to the scientific method, in effect promising to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Or nothing but, he says, which means that we must include all doubts, the caveats, the ifs, ands, and buts. On the other hand, we are not just scientists, but human beings as well. And like most people, we'd like to see the world a better place, which in this context translates into our working to reduce the risk of potentially disastrous climate change. To do that, we need to get some broad-based support to capture the public's imagination. That, of course, means getting loads of media coverage. So we have to offer up scary scenarios, make simplified, dramatic statements, and make little mention of any doubts we might have. This double ethical bind we frequently find ourselves in cannot be solved by any formula. Each of us has to decide what the right balance is between being effective and being honest. And then he concludes by saying, I hope that means being both. So finding a way, he says, to be effective and honest. But he openly talks about, well, if we want to really get to people, we can't just tell the truth because people aren't interested in the truth. It's a little too boring. So we have to offer up scary scenarios, make simplified dramatic statements, and make little mention of any doubts we might have. And I believe this goes back to, even if you look back at Satan in the Garden of Eden, talking to Eve, he says, oh, you will not surely die. Yeah, there's going to be a way. You got this tree of life over here. But he doesn't go into full disclosure. He doesn't talk about the differences and the things that happen. And I kind of view it the same as when coronavirus came around and the government said, okay, we're going to keep you all safe. So stop going out. Shut these businesses down. You're not essential. And we didn't go through full disclosure on all the consequences that flow from that. The effects to children, the effects to public education, to learning, to growth. The Surgeon General later coming out and saying, whoa, this was so unhealthy for us to be isolated like this. And just the impact to the economy, to businesses. We had a lot of inflation after this. The government pumped a ton of money into the economy to try and keep it afloat. There were so many side effects. And this is one of the things about human involvement is we try and fix one thing and we cause another thing. And there's always these kind of bouncing back and forth. And again, it's not to say that we shouldn't try or shouldn't be involved, but it's more to say when we get oversimplified promises, oh, we'll just keep you safe. You won't surely die. Trust us. When it's sensationalized, whoa, the whole world's going to end in 3 years. You go back through some of these climate news type articles. And in the year 2000, they said, this was an article in the Independent. It said snowfalls are now just a thing of the past. And it's talking about how the Earth's warming so much it's not going to snow anymore. And then they're saying there'll be a famine in 10 years because there's too many people and not enough rain. The Navy in the year 2013 announced that they had come up with way more complex models. And they said, based on our new models, the old models were saying the Earth would be ice-free in 84 years, or at least ice-free in the Arctic in 84 years. They said, but we're going to actually be there in 2016, which, sorry, 2016 would be 84 years ahead of the conventional model projections. So the Navy said, we've got better info, and in 3 years, we're going to be ice-free in the Arctic. It's going to have all these issues. Now, again, part of this is humans are trying their best. To this scientist's point, he's saying, we're trying to stop mass casualties as humans. We're trying to do our part to say, can we do something? But then he admits, but it feels like to do that, we have to potentially not fully disclose, not do things. And I look at that, and there is certainly, again, it's this fascinating battle, because with the war in heaven, we do believe we have darkness inside of us and light inside of us. And darkness may motivate us to not do much about something, to be free riders, to not worry about tomorrow. And it may be hard to get people to look to avert a full-scale societal tragedy. We look at things like nuclear bombs. We're wrestling with those right now as well. Meaning, when I say wrestling with those, Russia threatens to use them. It's fighting Ukraine. And what do we do? How do we make this sure? And so some people feel they need to be sensational to get the power to change that. But then the question becomes, but can you save us? And to that then also begs the question of, well, what can save us? And what is our life? And again, to me, this is where we have to come and say, well, do we believe in a God or not? Do we believe in something that brought us here to this point? Some things, whether you're from an evolution perspective or a religious perspective, something has kept this earth alive and going. If you look at everything that could have gone wrong in all the cosmos, it doesn't take much to destroy all life on this planet, even from a natural perspective. If our Earth was a little bit further from the sun, or gets hit by an asteroid, or has a big volcano go off, we could all be toast. And somehow we have, either through evolution or through creation, we're here. Something's going on. And this again goes back to this notion of what I believe strongly from the war in heaven. Who do we look to make sure our life is certain, or that life itself is certain? And we came here to die. That's part of our purpose here. And we can't, and again, death is so far an aspect for everyone. No matter how much faith you put in the government, no matter how much faith you have in communism, any of those things, people still die. And so we have to wrestle with this. And we have to then adopt the mindset, look at the mindset of, well, what's going to be healthier for me? And others as well. Some people feel, well, it's more governmental control. But again, I look at that and say, but the more governmental control we have, the more we get off balance, the more people start to suffer. And we can't, the law can't solve suffering. The law can't stop harm. We have so many laws on the books. And to your point, Michael, there's still people that die on Indiana's roads every day. And more laws won't change that unless we start banning actual conduct, such as you can no longer drive a car. But then will people still die? Will they slip and fall while they're walking to work in the snow? Like what's going to happen? Can we fully legislate these things? I don't think so. And then we have to choose, well, how do we then structure a society that allows for the best life for people? And to me, that's through the balance of agency. Agency takes some laws and rules, so it's not anarchy, but we have to have some freedom and ability to choose and do things on our own, even if maybe it's not the safest, or even if we might be in a car accident. We need to be able to make those decisions for ourselves. Michael, curious if you have any final thoughts on any of that.
Yeah, I like how you related it back to yourself, to the individual, that quote by that scientist when he said, paraphrasing, that they need to create headlines that get people talking, get people engaged, that don't have any doubt in them. It's something I see from a lot of the people writing articles, or those who say they have solutions, or politicians. They kind of talk about other people they want to get on board with them as just the aimless crowd that they need to lead by the nose, or that just the donkey that they can hold out the carrot in front of, and then the donkey will follow. They kind of look to the people around them in that way. Is, I have a solution, you need to follow me. Or this group of people that I belong with has a solution, everyone else needs to get in line. And I just want to say to individuals, don't be that donkey that just follows a carrot. Be an agent. Um, it is true that people will just follow from one sensation to the next, but I think it's when people aren't being agents unto themselves that they do so. We need to stop and say, wait, I have the ability to choose, to understand, to read, to learn, to engage in different things. And it shouldn't take a sensational headline to get me to do something good or bad or whatever the case is. It should be that we're trying to do those things of our own accord. And so don't let that be true of you. Don't let it be that you can be led around by the carrot of a sensational headline. Try to be doing good things because you want to do good things. Don't be led around by somebody because they're an expert. Try to follow because they're things that you believe in and that you're working towards. I know that to your other point of liberty and that connection with religion and faith, Frederick Bastiat said in his book, The Law, I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember exactly. He said, make a trial of liberty, which is an act of faith in God. Liberty takes faith that people, the way we're free and have liberty is when everybody's we're striving towards that goal of liberty together. We're all working. We're not being led around by the expert with the knowledge. We're all engaged in that. And so liberty is faith that we're all going to do that. And that's perhaps one of the reasons liberty is difficult, because sometimes it's hard to have faith in other people. But without that faith ultimately in God and in what God has created for us here, and that God has provided a way for us to live meaningfully here and after this life. Without that faith, then we'll choose to just be led around, or choose to have somebody else take care of things for us because we lose our faith. So that's the way I look at it, is don't be led around, be an agent, have faith in the outcomes. I guess as Gordon B. Hinckley said, have faith in the outcomes of the good things that you do. You're an agent. Most of the massive good things that will happen in this world will be the product of individuals making really good decisions in their own lives, not the product of some powerful government or entity putting forth a really impressive policy.
Yeah, and I think that, as I think about that, I think some people say, well, what should I do to, solve some of the world's problems or things? And I think that, to me, we have to go back to this notion of, how do we convey truth? Does the law convey truth for us if I just come out and say, you can no longer do this? Or is it to say that truth comes from teaching, through speaking? If we have something that's true, let's share it. Let's put it out there. Let's let it be open. And the more we make it open and subject to refinement, to public debate, we can see potentially where others don't agree with us. And we can go to work to convince people of the things, or to talk about some of the holes, or be honest about them, to say, yep, we're assuming that piece or whatnot. But we've changed hearts and minds significantly through a lot of discussion and efforts. And one of the things I will say that I think we've lost faith in as a society, we've lost faith in the power of our own speech. And I talk about this because speech gives life to topics and principles, even if very few people listen to it. We have to talk about things. We have to put out thoughts and opinions. We have to let them percolate, because of even if 2 or 3 people listen or just one, it can do something. And it was interesting. I met with a man on just a couple days ago, 3 days ago, and he had read a dissertation written by a PhD. It was a PhD candidate at the time. The person now got their PhD, and the person published their dissertation online. And they felt it was a very important dissertation with some very important topics, addressing some things in the science community. The people that reviewed the dissertation had to read it, but once it was posted online, from what this person could tell, and it was over 20 years ago, no one had read it. It just sat there. And finally, this guy that I met with had found it somehow, and he read it, and he was fascinated by it. And he put on a whole conference in San Francisco that talked about some of the principles and went through things. And they shared that with a number of people. He met with me. He shared some of those things. And I thought about that, and I thought, this person spent a lot of time writing ideas down, putting them out there, and from what they could see of the internet and its tracking, this man I met with was the only person that had read it after it had been reviewed for his dissertation, or his thesis, or whatever it was that he was doing. But I think about that, and I thought, but it still impacted the one person quite a bit that read it, and that one person then took it and shared it and built upon it. And the ideas we put out do shape hearts and minds. The things we say have an impact. We have to be willing to talk. It's one reason why the news talks so much. It's one reason why this guy said, yeah, you got to use, sensationalized headlines, because it does have an impact. But that goes again back to the things we say. When we talk with people, if we share what we believe, we share some information, it shapes things. Those people share, they think about it, they look at other things, and our actions spread. We have no way of tracking how far our speech and thoughts can spread. When we share it with someone, and they share it with someone, and they share it, and it sits and percolates, and eventually they share the idea, we have no way of tracking that. And it's part of where we have to have faith and trust that we've made it this far as a society. If we do our part, good can come. And that's one of the messages that we hope that you can take from this is, don't rely as much on the sensationalized side of things. Look at it with a grain of salt to understand that when it's sensationalized, there's probably some things left out of it. They may be looking for power. They may be looking just to sell something. But you can also communicate truth. And ultimately, I believe very strongly, the most powerful truths are the ones that we just share person to person. Those are the most real. And if we're willing to do that and engage in that process, a lot of good will come. Michael, any final thoughts for us today?
No, I'll just echo that you have a lot of power to do good, and it does take effort, though. It's not going to be a matter of sit around and wait every 4 years for your chance to vote. It takes effort and takes diligence, but we can, with faith, we can certainly work together to build something better, and it doesn't require an assurance of care from a group or an entity bigger or more powerful than us.
Yeah. So thanks for joining with us today. We hope you don't have any crazy weather events. We certainly pray for the people in LA with the wildfires. That's a very sad situation. But we also move forward in faith and hope that we can rebuild, we can do good, we can learn, we can grow, and we can keep developing as a society. And we push forward to continue to be good, bring good, and learn to just help our world be a better place overall. So thanks for joining us today, and we will follow up with you more next podcast.